This is Money Mind on CNA 938. I'm Chewy Lynn with Justine Moss. Earlier this month, the office sharing company WeWork had to temporarily close 2 floors of a building that it occupies in New York City after a worker in its subsidiary tested positive for coronavirus. And WeWork members in at least 7 other New York locations have tested positive for the virus, according to the New York Post. And there have been reported cases at locations in other major cities such as Los Angeles and Chicago.
And for now, most of WeWork's 848 locations around the world remain open despite a petition calling on them to close. In addition, some small businesses in the US are angry that WeWork has refused them refunds for a space they can't use, as nearly half of the American population will be required to stay at home by the end of this week. All this is raising questions about the outlook of open office spaces, which were once hailed as the office of the future.
So let's find out whether shared workspaces in Singapore have been affected in the same way. And joining us on the line is Matthew Chisholm, who is Chief Operating Officer of Arcc Spaces, a shared workspace brand with over 20 locations across Asia. Headquartered in Singapore, Arcc Spaces has locations across Malaysia, Yangon, Beijing, Shanghai, and Hong Kong. Hi, Matthew. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Chuelin. Good morning, Justine. How are you?
Very well, thanks.
Now,
Great.
Arcc Spaces has 20 locations across Asia, as we mentioned. Give us an idea of how badly affected they are by the COVID-19 situation, and is it worse in some areas than others?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the impact initially in China, in Beijing and Shanghai, was certainly significant, and I think the escalation there was much more rapid. We've found here in Singapore, I think that mostly due to oversight from the Singaporean government, the authorities, the Ministry of Manpower, etc., that there has been a more metered response, and I guess the impact on business has been compared to China certainly not as impactful. But our offices in places like Yangon, for example, yet to really feel the brunt. But I think we've had the opportunity that learning from what's going on in China, we've been able to apply those lessons to our different cities as the situation evolved in our different locations. Certainly, Kuala Lumpur last week was a huge shock to us. I mean, having 6 centres there and thousands of customers, to have to effectively shut that business down over a 24-hour period. The operational implications for that, as well as managing customers' expectations, was certainly a challenge, but one that we were prepared for because of these lessons that we had learned in China, and I think also following some of the great examples that had been set by the Singaporean authorities around getting ahead of the curve, keeping our approach very focused on our customers and having a clear message, sticking to the facts, and having that foresight, which was great for us.
So, Matthew, talk about the number of Arcc Spaces operations in Singapore. Give us some background. How big are your locations here? What kind of companies operate there?
Well, it's a very different sort of model to the sort of, I guess, the media poster child recently has been WeWork, in a very large company, scaling, driven by top-down investment largely. Arcc Spaces was founded in Singapore in 2003 in a space at Suntec City, and I think we've taken more of a quality versus quantity approach to growing and expanding our business, very much focused on our customers. Our centres, we have 4 spaces in Singapore at the moment, and so there's one that we're opening up at Marina Boulevard. We have one in the Civic District at High Street, which is our headquarters here in Singapore, a 7-story building. We have Suntec City, which was our original space. And we have a beautiful boutique space out at Duxton Hill in an old shop house there. So across the board, in terms of square footage, we would be covering about 50,000 square feet. And within that space, our customers comprise about, say, 500, 600 individuals.
Well, you mentioned you're opening your 4th space in Singapore next month at 1 Marina Boulevard. I guess the timing could be better?
Yeah, absolutely. We're encouraged, though. I think that the demand that we've seen from typical sectors in Singapore, which drive our business, professional services, technology companies, banking and finance, has been robust. We're very keen to make some announcements shortly all in all, we're very confident of the launch of that centre, and there have been a few road bumps on the way, but I think we were prepared in advance, and we managed to counter those and move forward, which has been great.
Yeah, and you mentioned that the demand is there, which is great for you guys. But what about a decrease in the take-up of individual seating since the start of the coronavirus outbreak? Have you seen anything there, anything
Definitely.
significant? Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, our industry has evolved in terms of where demand comes from. As you see many of these spaces coming onto the market, prolific expansion of our industry, that's driven by large corporate occupiers or SMEs, whereas 5 or 6 years ago, traditional co-working as a concept was more about communities and hot desking, and it was much more of a market that catered to the needs of startup companies, entrepreneurs, bootstrapping startups, venture capital companies, etc. And those times have changed, and I think with that change, we've seen far less provision of hot desking and open spaces, and far more provision for small to medium and in very, very large dedicated suites for corporate occupiers. So Arcc Spaces model has taken a middle road. We still do have hot desking spaces for those companies that require, say, 1 to, say, 3 desks in a casual setting. And there we're seeing social distancing happening, but people are certainly still coming to work. A lot of people have requirements for data storage, technology, security provisions, so they simply can't work from home. And given the layouts of our spaces, we don't have these very high volume, high density spaces like many of these larger competitors. So our spaces are configured and designed to be able to allow people to work with a certain degree of isolation, which has been great for us, really. Again, as I say, it's quality versus quantity, and when you see the layout of our floor plans, it makes it quite obvious that it is a different product. We've avoided that very high volume, high density sort of configuration.
This is Money Mind on CNA 938, and we're speaking with Matthew Chisholm, who is Chief Operating Officer of Arcc Spaces, a shared workspace brand with over 20 locations across Asia and 4 right here in Singapore. Now, Matthew, are companies using Arcc Spaces locations right now for maybe their split operations at this time? And if so, give us an example or give some examples of what industries they're in.
Sure. So we've had a couple of companies, largely technology companies in Singapore, tech and then related banking and financial, where they have split teams where, we'd see 5 to 10 people in one location in Suntec and another 5 to 10 people at our location in Duxton Hill. And I think it's an opportunity for these companies to really experiment with the idea of flexible working and understand how they can leverage enablers like technology, like using cloud-based software and collaborative tools. So, I think for us, one of the real value adds that we've been able to provide to these sorts of companies is that connectivity and our ability to respond to their requirements, to be able to go out and say, set up remote servers and set up firewalls. So we have that sort of responsive technology solution to really support remote working, which is important when you're moving teams around on a day-to-day basis.
And have any of your tenants expressed any concerns to you, Matthew, about the shared workspace and what they're most worried about during these challenging times?
Yeah, we have. I mean, mostly it's commercial concerns, as you would imagine, where they're saying, how can we address the cash flow issues in ensuring the sustainability of our business? And we've been relatively flexible with each of our customers on a case-by-case basis, where we may reduce the rental in the short term and then perhaps extend the overall term of their license to allow for that sort of flexibility to get us through this period. So from a financial point of view, I think that's the main concern. I guess also they certainly have some confidence that they saw that Arcc Spaces was on the front foot with this thing from the very beginning. We had sanitizers in all of our lifts, in all of our entry points and reception desks. We had all of our staff wearing masks. We'd even removed the typical mugs and used disposable versions temporarily in
And did you have to perhaps actively change the layout of some of your offices to reduce the density of the spaces?
Luckily not. We have our space in 75 High Street, for example. Each floor plate, I mean, we own that building, and that gives us a strategic advantage as well. And I guess that we have full control over the access provisions and the configurations. But each of those floors is roughly 3,000 square feet, 3,500 square feet. So to be able to provide one floor for one company means that we do have a great degree of separation between our different customers on each floor and in each space already anyway. There is one shared area, which is our cafe and breakout space on the third floor. But I think that it comes to a point as well where we need to say, look, we've done the best we can to provide a safe and hygienic place for you, but that companies and individuals themselves also need to exercise a degree of personal accountability and responsibility. So, the approach that we've taken is to ensure that they're as safe as possible within our space, and then it's up to them as to how close or far away they sit from another individual.
Yeah, exactly.
Common sense, right?
Yeah, Matthew. So, Matthew, do you think the concept of the co-working space, has it lost its appeal a little bit, or is it still, do you think, a popular option for these businesses?
I think it's very interesting. I mean, we talk about in the prelude to this conversation, we were talking about WeWork, and I think these very large models, the timing for that company in particular is perhaps not so great, because they do rely on demand from large corporates and enterprise spaces, who, given the prevailing market conditions, obviously these companies still have large traditional office spaces. And if the commercial real estate that within those large corporations decides to restack or downsize or increase the utilization and apply workplace strategy, they're going to consolidate back into traditional office space, as opposed to considering expansion into flexible workplace options. And in many cases, I think we'll see that those large corporates will do that, and they will start shedding their flexible workplace, because that's the purpose in the first place. The real driver value of using flexible workplace for these companies was as an additional contingency. In Asia particularly, I think in the US and Europe, maybe it was more of an integrated element of an overall real estate portfolio for a company. But in Asia, we hadn't really seen the product gain a lot of traction with corporates yet. And I think that's going to put the industry back a long way with these very large companies that are overexposed because they have taken huge leases over a longer term. And seeing that demand from corporates dry up is going to have a significant impact on the sort of short to medium term feasibility of their business model. But we're confident because, as I mentioned, we've focused on quality over quantity, and we've developed sustainable relationships with landlords and developed centres that really meet the needs of our customer base, which we understand intimately. So it's a sustainable business model, and I think also, as I mentioned, the configuration of our spaces very much. We've avoided that high volume, high density configuration. So I think we're well placed, and I think we'll continue to see demand from our the segments that we support, and the sizes of the sort of suites that we provide, which is strong. So SMEs in tech and professional services and banking and finance. So overall, we're confident.
Great. Well, thanks so much for speaking to us this morning, Matthew. We've been speaking with Matthew Chisholm. He's Chief Operating Officer of Arcc Spaces. It's a shared workspace brand with over 20 locations across Asia.